All right, here we go. Welcome back in. This is Hawk Talk on Melrose. This time we are going to talk a little Tim Lester in his first year as offensive coordinator for Iowa. We're going to get into all that, and then we're going to talk more about can we kind of take that next step. We saw last year definitely growth in the offense, but can we take that next step going into year two under Tim Lester? And then we'll also talk about the hire that we had a couple days ago from Wake Forest. We'll just kind of discuss what he can bring to the table for us and all that. So let's get right into it. Tyler, we'll open it up. What were your thoughts on year one under Lester?
I thought overall it was a good year. What he inherited, I think, coming in, what was it, in the springtime, shorter off season than some of these coaches that get the full off season when the season ends. He comes in the spring. He inherits a QB room that I thought, was terrible. Let's just call it what it is. Deacon Hill is, the guy, Cade McNamara, that whole situation. A really terrible QB room. I thought the wide receiver room, not great. Just the offense in general. And, I think me and you predicted and said this was going to be still an up and down year offensively because it's not going to be an overnight fix. I remember doing my solo episode last year before the season, and I said that, and that was the premise of it. And it was like, this is going as good as I think he can be. It's good. It's not an overnight fix. And so with the QB room, like I mentioned, was terrible. Getting there late and trying to implement a new offense, right? With, and some new players, which to his credit, he got Sullivan, Jacob Gill. I just think he did about as well as you could probably ask him to do given the circumstances is essentially what I'm trying to say. I thought what he did in the run game to improve that to, what was it, over 200 yards a game on the ground. He got Kaleb Johnson to look like the Kaleb Johnson we all thought he could be. Dealing with, again, the inconsistency at quarterback, which we kind of touched on last episode. I just thought he did a really good job. I know the passing game still needs a lot of work, and that's what we're probably going to dive into here, with Tim Lester, and that continue to soar, right? So that's the biggest question, but I thought given the circumstances and turning around, half the equation, which is the run game, I thought was a successful first year.
I'm going to play a clip from last year. This was like 2 days before the first game. One of my bold predictions, which it wasn't really bold because I'm sure 95% of fans thought the same way. But I just thought going into last year, I was very, very, very confident on the run game, and I wasn't so confident about the passing game. So here's a clip from last year. The first one is Iowa will average right at or above 4.5 yards per carry. However, I do think the passing game is going to be still behind. There's going to be growing pains. There's going to be times of frustration, but we have to remember, it's year one. But the running game, I am very, very, very bold on that. I just think it's going to be really good. So just like that, the run game averaged over 5 yards a carry, and the passing game was well behind that. And it was definitely a work in progress. And sometimes it was even worse than maybe we kind of even thought. We thought it was going to be slightly better, but not that much better. And there were times last year it still wasn't that good. And we'll get into the numbers here pretty soon. I think two things can be true about last year. I think number one, Kaleb Johnson was unbelievable and definitely masked over some of the problems that still existed for this offense. He helped kind of inflate some of those numbers. But you could also say the second thing can be true is Tim Lester helped him with that. Right now, yes, Kaleb Johnson, really, really good player. And there were times last year where he made something out of nothing, right? But I think what Lester brought to the table with the kind of the new updated scheme, right? Not really doing so much outside zone, more of a mid zone type of scheme. It helped the offensive line, I think, get and hit blocks a lot better. It created creases for Kaleb Johnson then. So all that is true. And the offensive line was obviously a little bit more experienced going to last year. So you have to kind of give both sides their fair share of, that's the reason, right? Yeah, Kaleb Johnson was really good. Yes. But also give credit where credit's due with Tim Lester bringing in a new scheme, updated scheme, the Shanahan style offense that we kept talking about going into last year. It definitely helped. right? There's no coincidence. You don't go from, Kaleb Johnson, who in year 2, was hurt a little bit, but he just wasn't the player that he was freshman year. And then just in year 3, huge jump. And yes, credit him. He's a stud. He's a freak, but also credit the new scheme.
Yep. I think they work hand in hand, right? I think Tim put Kaleb in a position to succeed, and then Kaleb, being the stud that he is, he took full advantage of that.
So let's take a look at some of these numbers now from last year. So I'm going to go with what last year was, Tim Lester's first year, and then the year prior, which was Brian's last year at Iowa. So points per game, we ended up averaging this year 27.7 points per game, which was 72nd out of 133 teams. Year prior to that, we were at 15.4. So we were almost double the points per game. And that year, we finished second to last in the country, 129 out of 130 teams. So that year, there was only 130 teams that were ranked. There was obviously a few more teams that jumped to the FBS level. So this last year, there was 133. So yeah, a significant improvement reflecting Tim Lester's impact, right? Just that alone, that points per game, going from that to that. Total offense, we ended up with 328.8 yards per game. Going back to 2 years ago, we were at 234.6, so almost a 100-yard jump, but it still wasn't great because we finished 117 this last year out of 133 teams. 2 years ago, we were dead last, so that's really bad. So yes, a marginal improvement there, going about 100 yards more. I mean, I will take that, right? Kind of, taking that next step, right? Yeah. But we definitely got to improve that number. I mean, being 117 out of 133 teams is still not good. Going into last year, Tim Lester talked a lot about like just, cutting things in half. And he did that for most things. Total offense wasn't there yet. Rushing yards per game, we finished with 197.2 rushing yards per game, which was 24th in the country going back 2 years ago. And this is what frustrated me under Brian Ferentz was, we talked about, okay, what was our identity? And everybody associated with Iowa football with running the football. But that wasn't our identity because we were not that good at running the football. That year we finished with 115 yards per game, which was 107th out of 130 teams. And not only that, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the screen. Go back to the last years prior to that under Brian Ferentz. 2022, we only finished with above 1,200 yards. But look at our yards per rush that year, 2.92, under 3 yards per carry. I mean, we almost doubled that just this year alone in that category. And look at the touchdowns, only 12 touchdowns that year versus this last year. We had 30 rushing touchdowns. So that's not good. And we were under 100 yards per game. And then 2021, we were slightly better than 2022. We were at 1,700 rushing yards, but the, yards per rush and the touchdowns still weren't there. And in 2020, think about it. We played 6 less games in 2020. We had just as many touchdowns that year than we did in 2021. And that year we actually had almost as many yards and we had 6 less games. So in 2020, we were definitely better running the football. Credit our offensive line that year. We had Tristan Wirfs, Larry Jackson, Tyler Linderbaum. Like that was a really good offensive line. Everybody, like I said, everybody associated with us with, our identity is running the football and all this. And it's like, no, it wasn't. But you look at these numbers, we were not good at that. So that's what I really liked about Tim Lester's first year is we got back to that is what Iowa football is. And we are going to be really freaking good at it. Pound the rock. And that's what we did this year. 30 rushing touchdowns, over 5 yards per carry. I mean, think about that. I mean, if you're just judging off like a first down, we're averaging 5 yards, just one run, and you're setting up a 2nd and 5. And no wonder our third down conversion, which we'll look at here in a little bit, went up, right? Because instead of 3rd and 10, we're looking at, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, a little bit easier to convert. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I was going to say, I just remember being on this podcast last year and being like, we were literally saying, we were like, running the football isn't even our identity anymore. We were pounding the drum being like, Brian has to go because we aren't even doing what we're known for. And, that, like you said, and that's really the first key. And I said that is you have to reestablish the run game at Iowa. Because we're not going to ever be, at least I feel like personally under Kirk Ferentz, this pass happy team. We're just not built that way.
No.
We're not built that way from a personnel standpoint.
Especially when you don't have a quarterback.
Well, exactly. And then from a talent perspective. And so you have to be able to run the football. That sets up everything else. And so, I felt like we got back to that this last year at obviously a historic rate. I mean, Kaleb Johnson he broke the record for most rushing touchdowns in a season. And that's Sean Green's record. So, that's a pretty big record. Tim had a lot to do with that. And, again, I'm not taking anything away from Kaleb because he was an unbelievable player.
I wanted to make it known that before when I said two things can be true, because I wanted to be known that he is a stud. He is a lot of the reason why it was good. But
correct. Yeah. But here's the thing. He never got to showcase that under Brian because we were so freaking predictable, right?
Yep.
So
it's
the creativity that Tim Lester was able to
use in motion, doing things like
that. The run game
definitely
specifically, helped. Exactly. So everything that Tim did really set Kaleb up to actually succeed this year, and then it worked for the run game.
Yep. Now let's go to the passing game, because this was a weaker area, and this is where before when I said Kaleb Johnson masked some of the problems, because I think people don't realize our passing game was still really bad last year. We finished 129 out of 133 teams. We only averaged 131 yards or passing yards per game, which wasn't that much more than the year prior with Deacon Hill. We finished with 118 passing yards per game. So, and we actually finished a little bit better actually in rank. We finished 127 out of 130 teams. So I guess it's about the same when you factor in less teams.
And really quick, and I want to say this, it's not the case for every game, obviously. When teams couldn't stop Kaleb Johnson, why did we had no reason to do anything other than just dominate you on the ground.
Yep.
So that I feel like affects it a little bit too.
Exactly. I think three things when you look at this passing game from last year, and this was what I was going to say, was number one, we were so run heavy, because why would we not with Kaleb Johnson? And when he's doing really good, why you're not going to pass as much? That's number one. Number two, when you don't have a quarterback, right? 80% of this year, we had Cade McNamara, who is now at Eastern Tennessee. I don't even know, some school that I've never heard of. There's a reason why he's there now, because his injuries and just things like that. He's just not the player he was at Michigan. And then our other quarterback, I defended Sullivan a lot, and I'm going to keep defending him, but I also keep saying there's a reason why he transferred, and the reason why he wasn't a solidified starter at Northwestern. He's just not that dominant of a passer. He's really good at running the football, but he's just not that good of a passer. And so when you factor in two quarterbacks that are just not that good at passing the football, your passing yards aren't going to be great. And then number three, our wide receiver core was very young last year. I mean, think about it. We were relying on a true freshman, Reese Vanderzee. We were relying on two redshirt freshmen, and Dane Howard and Jerry Abui. Jacob Gill was really our only veteran wide receiver. But you think about even him, he didn't play much at Northwestern. So he didn't start there at all.
Player too.
He was, a junior, or I think he was considered a senior last year. He still has another year left. So he's been in college for a while, but he hasn't really had that much experience. So I think all those three things really contribute to the fact that, and you're playing a whole new system with new routes, things like that. It's going to take time. All right. So I made this up, actually. I kind of looked back at the last couple years with the passing yards. And what I did was I wanted to see how many games we threw for over 200 yards, threw for under 99 yards or under 100 yards, and then anywhere in between that. And this last year, as you can see, you're averaging 131.6 passing yards per game. We had more games under 100 passing yards than we did over 200 yards. And I just, you just got to get better at that, right? We had 8 games in between 100 and 199. You go back to 2023, once again, we had 5 games under 99 passing yards. We only had 1 game above 200. Go to 2022, we had 3 games above 200 and 3 games under 100. 2021 was probably one of our better years. We had 5 games over 200. So as you can see, the trend was slowly, getting worse and worse. Yeah, because in 2020, we had no games under 99 yards. That was Petras' first year. You can contribute 2020, 2021 due to the fact that we had better wide receivers. You think about 2020, we had Emir Smith-Marset, we had Brandon Smith, we had Tyrone Tracy. 2021, we had, Charlie Jones. I think you still had Tyrone Tracy that year, Nico Raganini. So you had some good wide receivers that really helped. But this is where it's just crazy so we played 62 games since 2020. We've had almost more games where we threw for under 100 yards than we did over 200 yards. We were at 14 games above 200, which was 23% of the games. And then under 100 yards, we were at 13, which was 21% of the game. So when you factor in, 10 game intervals, that means, our chance of having a game that was, under 100 yards was 2 out of the 10 games, which isn't very good. And then in between 100 and 199, 56%. So when you factor in that percentage and then also the percentage under 100, that's almost 80% of the games we were going to throw for under 200 yards. And so that, once again, it's just, we need to get better at that. And then I also threw in here the last game where we threw for over 300 passing yards. You'd have to go back prior to COVID, November 23rd, 2019 versus Illinois. I was fresh out of college at that point. We both were. I mean, that felt like a long time ago. That was the last time we threw for 308 yards that game.
When you look at those, it's kind of staggering, and it kind of hits you right in the face. But it also makes you realize it's like maybe this is why it seems like we can never get over the hump, right? Because we have a ceiling, because our passing game isn't where it needs to be on a consistency basis, right? We'll have this game where we'll throw for 220 yards, and then we'll have a game where we'll throw for 60. That you just can't you can't have that. And I think that limits us in terms of overall team success, right? I mean, that if we want to get to where we want to get to, playoffs, we talked about it. Not, on a consistent basis. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying be competitive in the Big Ten, right? Compete against the top Big Ten teams. Be competitive in those games, which I think me and you get annoyed at, where it's like, man, we run into Ohio State and we already know it's going to be a struggle to score a point. And I don't want to be in that position anymore. And I think, Tim is tasked with a really hard job and to fix this, right? You just laid out the numbers. It's not an easy fix, but I think he is capable of doing it, because I think he can do what's, the lifeblood of college football, and that's recruiting. And I think he can get the right guys in there to hopefully try to solve some of these issues. Yep,
it starts this year, and we'll talk about, because obviously at the end of all this, we'll get into this next year. But yeah, the passing game is just going back to looking back at the past 5 years. It is definitely a thing where, man, like we just every year we got kind of worse and worse and worse, and the average just passing yards per game kept getting worse. And once again, this last year we were slightly better, but definitely not where we need to be at. And when you're trying to recruit quarterbacks, when you're trying to recruit wide receivers to come, you got to get that average up, and you got to start being more consistent in the passing game, like you're talking about. All right, let's get into some other key metrics from last year. Yards per play. This one we definitely improved upon. We finished 5.62 yards per play, which was 80th in the country. Not bad. I mean, considering 2 years ago we were dead last at 3.94. So we definitely improved yards per play, which is good. Touchdowns definitely improved here. We finished with 40 touchdowns this year, 30 rushing and 10 passing, which was 73rd in the country. So we pretty much cut that in half, because 2 years ago we finished with only 20 touchdowns, 11 rushing and 9 passing, which was 127th in the country.
That's so bad.
So that was much improved. Once again, our running game was just a lot better. And I think this is another thing that I kind of forgot to talk about at the beginning, was the way that he made adjustments. You think about the Iowa State game, we could not get in the end zone. It felt like the Brian Ferentz era, where we'd get in the red zone and not score. And so what does he do the next game? Okay, we got to get this figured out. We're going to do something different here. Okay, we're going to bring in Brendan Sullivan, create a little bit different of a mismatch with the running quarterback, and voila, looked a lot better. We were able to get in the end zone a lot easier. And that's what I loved about Lester. And this is what he talked about going back to already like February of last year when he first got announced that he was offensive coordinator and he had his presser. He just talked about being flexible and making adjustments when adjustments need to be made. And we saw that at the beginning of the year, and it was really cool to see, because that's something that I'm telling you right now, we would not have seen under Brian Ferentz.
Not just those type of adjustments, but hell, even in-game adjustments. Well, how many times have we said, like, we doesn't look like we game plan for a team, right? It always looks like, well, Brian even said it, we're just going to do what we do and do it better. It's like, no, how about you get away from the stuff that isn't working and you be flexible and adapt, right?
Third down conversion, 41% compared to 29% the year prior. So we finished the year at 60th in the country. 2 years ago, we finished 126. So we were almost dead last. So just a lot better. We were actually sustaining drives, keeping the defense off the field a little bit. Not saying all the time, right? There were still times where it felt like, man, we were having to punt the football a lot, but be able to sustain drives, it's critical, right, in football. Completion percentage. This was a big one that Brian Ferentz always talked about, and we could never get it above 60%. 2 years ago under Deacon Hill and just under, those quarterbacks, Cade McNamara, Deacon Hill, we finished the year 49% completion percentage, which was second to last in the country. Last year, we rose, and this is with quarterbacks that, let's face it, are not that good. 63%, which was 52nd in the country. Much, much better. And then red zone offense, this one's a little misleading because you get in the red zone. We usually always have a good kicker. So like 2 years ago, it was 80% conversion percentage in the red zone, which was 88th in the country. This last year, we were 90%, which was 21st in the country. But what I like to look at is touchdowns scored in the red zone. And this last year, out of the 41 times in the red zone, we actually had 26 touchdowns, which was 63% of the time. 2 years ago, we only had 35 chances in the red zone, and we only scored on 14 with touchdowns. So that was 40%. Yeah. Some other things that I want to also bring up too that maybe aren't talked about as much, but last year we scored 40 plus points in 4 games. Illinois State, Washington, Wisconsin, and Northwestern. We scored over 40 points. If you look back the last, 5 years prior to Tim Lester, 2023, we only did it 1 time. 2022, 0 times. 2021, 1 time. 2020, 2 times. And 2019, 2 times. So to almost double and sometimes even like quadruple the amount of 40-point games is pretty big. And in our 8 wins this year, we averaged 34.2 points per game in our 8 wins, and in our 5 losses. And this is where, like you're talking about, the consistency. In our 5 losses, we averaged 17.4 points per game. So it was definitely highs and lows. Yeah. But once again, that we talked about that, it's not going to look pretty all the time. There's going to be, it's going to be a roller coaster ride this first year. And that's what it's always like in a new system. So that's kind of expected. And then one last thing too, looking back at last year, we ran a total of 933 total plays, and we finished the year off. And this is, very, very close to one another. Percentage of rundowns was 57.9%, and passing plays were 42.1%. So definitely ran the football more, which is expected. We're kind of a run first team, but it's still pretty dang close. And you like to see that between the two. All those things, definitely, we were boosted in a lot of categories. The only one that we really weren't was passing game. And then in total offense a little bit too. But once again, total offense is very misleading. So overall, if I'm going to give a letter grade, I'm going to say, upper B, like B plus. I mean, A minus, considering what he had to deal with going into last year, and dealing with a quarterback that wasn't that good, and young wide receiver core and a whole new scheme, whole new system. You really can't get much better than what we envisioned in year one. And going back to what I said at the beginning of this podcast, our expectation going to last year was like temper expectations. It's going to take time. It's not going to look pretty from the get-go. And I actually think we did better than what I actually thought we were going to do, because when Tim Lester said, we're going to cut things in half, I was like, oh, that's going to be pretty tough, because we were like dead last in every single category. But looking at all these things, we did cut a lot of things in half.
Well, yeah. And like you said, the total numbers, maybe we didn't make that big jump offensively, but like you said, those key statistics within those numbers, we did improve upon dramatically. And you of course copied me. I had B plus as an overall grade for Tim this last year. And for the same reasons we just talked about, right?
To be fair, I said B plus, but then the more I thought about it, I actually said more like A minus, because I really do think for what he had to deal with and all that, I actually think offensively we were a lot better than I even thought we were going to be. Yeah.
No, and 100%. I just think that if you're going to critique anything, I think, and this isn't, again, Tim's fault because we had such a great running back, but just going forward, not always relying on a run game, because sometimes that run game will get stopped. And if you can't run the ball and you don't have that passing game to kind of turn to, then this is what we see.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I talked about is just, again, it's not Tim's fault because it's 1 year, but again, just continuing to build on being more competitive against the top teams. I mean, I hate going into these games and being like, it's not just that I think we're going to lose because again, I knew what we were dealing with Ohio State last year, but it's the mindset of like, are we even going to score? And just my last thing, I think, not saying it's unfair, but it's like, I think grading Tim Lester, it'll be interesting to grade him this next year, right?
Yep.
A year into
two.
that system with his guys, I think that's going to be more of a fair and accurate grade or score, whatever you want to call it, for Tim Lester and how we perform this next year. And again, it's going to be tough because of the schedule, and I don't want to minimize that because it's a real thing. But again, with his guys, and you would think tremendously better quarterback play. I'm curious to see where we stack up.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that is a good segue to this next topic of next year, year 2 under Tim Lester. Can we, title this episode Soar in year 2? And, I don't know if that's maybe the correct word, soar, but take what we did last year, kind of the building blocks, and be even better than we were last year. It's going to be difficult in the run game because of how good Kaleb Johnson was. But I'm still confident that the run game can still be good because we still have decent running backs. Kamari Moulton, Jadwin Patterson. I don't think they're ever going to be Kaleb Johnson good, but they can be decent. And we saw that in the bowl game. And this is kind of the reason why I wanted to see Kaleb Johnson one more time. But at the same time, I was okay with him not playing the bowl game because I really wanted to see what we'd be like without him. And I thought the run game was still fine. Like they looked great.
Yeah.
And so we got to build off of that, but yes, the passing game definitely needs to take that next step. And I'm feeling a little bit more confident than I was last year because we actually have a quarterback, or we hope that we have a quarterback because we saw what he did at South Dakota State and Mark Gronowski that can deliver us and make us better in the passing game. And not only that, but we now have a wide receiver core. This is the first time we can say this in many years, as long as we stay healthy. Feel pretty good about the wide receiver core because a lot of these guys were here last year. Their experience. We got Jacob Gill back, Reese Vanderzee, Jerry Bowie, Dane Howard, Seth Anderson. I really feel good about these guys. It's just the wide receiver core to me, the last few years, man, like I was so, worried about it because we were young. And then there was years, we had injuries. But I think if we could stay healthy, I think this is it's not a, oh my God, blow you out of the roof type of wide receiver core, but I think it's a nice wide receiver core for us.
But yeah, I think it's only going to continue to be better with better talent, right? I think that's what's going to make his scheme, this RPO, this run pass option, motion, and sprinkle in a little creativity, maybe still with Sullivan in the run game. Like I think it's going to. I mean, we saw flashes of it last year with lesser talent. What makes me think it's going to not get better when we have better talent, right?
And think about it this way too. Like last year, this entire offseason, you're just trying to implement a new system. Like that is your focus. Now this year, okay, we've already implemented the system. The guys know the system. Now it's about, like you said, like let's start getting kind of creative. Let's do things that we didn't really do last year. Let's add some wrinkles to everything because you couldn't really do that last year because you're just focusing on just getting the system down.
And Tim's like learning how to like teach his own system right now, like even for not just the players, but him, like as a coach, like now he knows how to do it too. Right. Yep. And so hopefully it's an easy transition for a guy like Gronowski coming in, and learning this. So I just feel I feel a lot better about where we're at. I think, man, like even a year ago, I was nervous even when Tim came in, but man, he's done a hell of a job.
And another thing I don't think we really talk about, like he's calling plays during games. And so going back to last year, that's his first year calling plays in the Big Ten. There's going to be some growing pains there too, right? For him. And he's going to learn a lot. And so going into year 2, your hope is, because let's face it, there were some play calls that were kind of head scratching. There were some things where like down in the red zone, it's kind of, what are we doing? But those are things that you kind of learn from. And if you're a good offensive coordinator, you do learn from them. Going back to Brian Ferentz, I felt like he never did learn from him. He just kept doing the same things. He even talked about that, doing the same thing and just do it better next time. It's like, no, that's not how you do it. You look at what you need to do better and change things up. And so
exactly self-reflection.
So that's another reason why I feel confident that we can be better and soar in year 2 under Tim Lester. And then another reason why I think Iowa and Tim Lester, we can take this next step this next year is just a couple of days ago. We bring in a guy from Wake Forest, offensive coordinator Warren Ruggiero. I'm really excited about this get as a senior advisor, a senior analyst for us. Probably will only be here for 1 year, but man, his resume speaks for himself. He was offensive coordinator for them, quarterbacks coach for 11 seasons. And then some of these stats are insane. His offense has finished in the top 10 in the country in either total offense or scoring offense at all 6 of his stops in college football. He's been top 6 in the country in passing offense at the last 4 stops he was at, and he has coached an All-American quarterback at 5 of the last 6 stops. The Deacons, Wake Forest, they set nearly 400 school records, including points per game, total offense, first downs, and passing yards from 2018 to 2022. Additionally, Wake Forest has produced the second most points in the ACC over the last 8 years. That's pretty good. And we have to keep this in mind. This is Wake Forest we're talking about. This is not a big-time program. In 2021 alone, Wake Forest scored a program's best 574 points, an average of 41 points per game. That's 4th most in ACC history. And then, obviously he coached Sam Hardman, who was a pretty good quarterback. And then he also had a wide receiver who, over a span of 2 years, owns a program record for touchdown receptions. He had 15, which was a school record, 15 scoring receptions in 2021 alone, which tied for the second among all FBS wideouts in 2021 and 2022. So he's a proven good offensive coordinator, and we're getting him as just like a senior analyst, which is crazy to me. And once again, he's probably only going to be here for a year because that's how it works. Comes here just for a year, and then you'll probably get a job offer come next year. But this is a huge get. This tells me, the first thing I thought of, this tells me we are trying like crazy to get our passing game figured out. Tim Lester is too.
Yep.
And we're bringing in a guy that's going to help with that. Are we going to run the slow mesh that he ran at Wake Forest? I don't think so. Well, maybe, we might incorporate a little bit, going back to what I said before. Now that we got the system incorporated in the scheme, now it's about, maybe adding some wrinkles. So yeah, maybe a little bit, but I think it's more just, he's going to be there to help with the quarterbacks and just get this right in the passing game. We have the quarterbacks now. We got a lot of quarterbacks in the room that are going to be competing like hell here coming up with spring ball and then into fall camp. And you add a quarterback in Mark Gronowski that's proven that we feel really good about. So let's get this passing game going. Let's get this figured out. Going back to what I said on last episode, it starts this year. We got to get this where we can start attracting quarterbacks and wide receivers to come to Iowa. And the one way you can do that is by showcasing that you can do it. Starts this year with that. And so I really, really like this hire.
I love it because, again, like you mentioned, offensive coordinator, kind of quarterbacks coach, like he works directly with those guys. He turned, you just said it, Wake Forest into a team that could score the rock and produce a guy like Sam Hartman, who I remember was a stud.
Yeah.
And at Wake Forest. And I think did he go to Notre Dame?
Yep, he went to Notre Dame 2 years ago, I think. Yeah.
So, I mean, and again, it's like, and I love that. I love getting that because that's what we're trying to do at Iowa. And you're exactly right. That's what my first thought was too. It's like, I think we're fully committed to fixing this problem because we know we have to get it right. And like you said, if we can get him for a year, hey, I'll take it. And because anything is better than what we've been through, and to actually see these changes and to see us fixing the problem
shows that we really want to.
I love that. Yeah.
But just looking at his overall resume and those, from 2017 to 2022, you can't get much better than what they were doing and what they were producing. And once again, getting him as just like a senior analyst, I will take that any day of the week. So it's a huge get for us, kind of out of nowhere. I was not expecting it. It's just bam, we're hiring this guy. And like I said, it's a big move for us. He's gonna help Tim Lester. Tim Lester is essentially going to be his boss, essentially, and just kind of be Tim's right-hand man, having two minds instead of just one mind, right? And so I think we got pretty lucky getting a guy that, once again, has a really, really good resume. But yeah, just to wrap up all this, for me, it's just last year, I think we did as good of a job as Tim Lester could do. I was happy with what we saw. And I'm excited, and I'm grateful that we got Tim Lester. I know right away when we got him, I was a little like, I don't know, because I think everybody was high on Kevin Johns, and so no one really gave Tim Lester a chance right away. But then you started hearing him speak, and you started kind of seeing some of the stuff he had said and did, and you started kind of believing. And we went into last year, and we saw some good. We also saw some bad, but rightfully so. And so now it's all about just taking what we did last year and just building off of it and being better in year 2. And I'm really excited. And I can say confidently for the first time in a long time, I actually feel good about the offense. Maybe that has a little bit to do with getting Markinowski, but I feel really, really confident. One more thing about Tim Lester too that I just love is his personality. He just seems like a type of guy that you just want to go have a beer with. He's just always in a good mood. He's always positive. He loves to kind of he kind of picks your brain a little bit. And I just love that about him. And I think that not the only one that thinks that, because we've heard a lot about recruits that just love sitting there talking with him. Reason why we got Markinowski. Like, there's no way he comes to Iowa without Tim Lester. And so he's a great recruiter. He's a great relationship builder. And I think that's something that maybe we kind of take for granted, but man, like, we got a guy that is just not only a good coach, but he's just a good human. And he just seems like a really cool dude. So that goes a long ways in a lot of things. But anyways, well, that will end it. We will end it there. We'll be back, or I will be back with a solo episode probably next week, going over, or not this week, but the following week, going over spring practice storylines as we will enter, spring practice coming up on March 26th. So I'll have an episode out then, and then we'll just kind of see how everything plays out. But until then, guys, have a good rest of your week, and go Hawks.